On a blistering summer day in 1919, a man found himself sprinting for his very existence. And the sleepy town of Verlaine, Arkansas had turned into a nightmarish landscape. For 2 days, black bodies of men and women were strewn along dirt roads, lifeless testimonies to unspeakable violence. Those who had managed to escape were hiding in cotton fields, their heart pounding to the sing of distant gunfire. Out of breath, the man feverishly wishing escape ducked in the narrow alley, his feet pounding the ground, echoing the urgency in his chest. He reached the train station, his mind barely processing the conductor's final call for boarding. With a burst of speed, he clambered above the platform, relief washing over him until the conductor's next words struck him like icicles. Giving him a curious once-over, the conductor remarked, "Why are you leaving before the fun begins?" Without waiting for a reply, he added, "There's a damned yellow Negro down here passing for white, and when they get through with him, he won't pass for white no more." Afterwards, he would laugh at his remarks. What the conductor failed to realize is that the passenger they were looking for was standing mere inches away from him, his heart pounding out of his chest. He would later write in his autobiography that, "No matter the distance, I shall never take as long a train ride as that one seemed to be. The tension in that train car could have been cut with a knife." This is the story of Walter White, field secretary for the NAACP, who investigated lynchings disguised as a white man. And if you like stories like this, you can find more stories like this at onemichistory.com. Also, if you like the channel, you can do so on my Buy Me Coffee Patreon page in the description below. But without further ado, let's get started. Walter White was born with blonde hair and piercing blue eyes, July 1st, 1893, in the bustling heart of Atlanta, Georgia. At a glance, one would assume that he was the epitome of Southern aristocrat, but beneath this exterior lay the soul of a man whose lineage was complex and tumultuous as the era that he grew up in. Walter's family tree was a tangled forest of both enslaved African ancestors and white plantation owners. This fusion of histories created a poignant reality for anyone that fell under the one-drop rule. This law that anyone with even a trace of black ancestry was unequivocally black. With this aching chasm of dichotomy, Walter White found not just his identity, but his life's calling. Walter's family consisted of his mother, Madeline Harrison, and his father, George White, both who were enslaved individuals who clawed their way up to middle-class respectability as a teacher and a postal worker. The couple's love for knowledge and the devotion to progress anchored their commitment to alleviate racial oppression. So in a world where White could have easily passed for a white man, in his memoir, he would recount the night that solidified his determination to stand up against racial oppression. It was the harrowing night of September 22nd, 1906. Atlanta was awash with the flames of rage stoked by unsubstantiated claims that a black man had attacked a white woman. Driven by this illusionary sense of supremacy, a white mob began their massacre, aiming to quell any thoughts of ascension of Atlanta's black community. The mob headed for White's home, intent on terrorizing them, and inside, 13-year-old Walter stood resolutely with a shotgun in hand beside his father, his heart pounding with fear and defiance. Miraculously, their home was spared this surge of violence, but Walter's outlook on life was forever altered. After witnessing these atrocities firsthand, he made the irreversible decision that he could never align himself with a race that harbored such hatred. So, graduating from Atlanta University in 1916 and brimming with optimism and ambition, White embarked on a dual path as executive of the esteemed Standard Life Insurance Company and as an activist, he co-founded the Atlanta branch of the NAACP. Under the stewardship of Secretary, the branch achieved a landmark triumph by preventing the school board from eliminating the 7th grade at a black public high school. With this, White caught the keen eyes of two influential figures at the NAACP, W.E.B. Du Bois and their executive secretary, James Weldon Johnson. Impressed with his tenacity and his political finesse, Johnson visited Atlanta in 1917, and it didn't take long for him to realize this young man could be a powerful asset for the NAACP. By 1918, White was whisked off to New York, taking up the mantle of Assistant Secretary of the NAACP's headquarters. Little did he know he was about to walk into a storm. With America grappling with an alarming surge of lynchings between 1889 and 1918, the NAACP documented 3,224 brutal lynchings, with African Americans being the primary targets. No sooner than White settled into his new role than he was dispatched to Tennessee to investigate a gruesome lynching at Isdale Springs, Tennessee. The victim was a black man named Jim McElherron, who had been accused of raping a white woman, which was a very common, often unfounded accusation used to justify such brutalities. Upon arriving in Isdale Springs, White found the atmosphere was thick hostility and tension. He visited the scene of McElherron's lifeless body was hung, and the gruesome act was still evident. He interviewed locals, including supposed eyewitnesses, who either reluctantly recounted the event or vehemently justified the lynching as an act of justice. This harrowing experience deeply affected him, strengthening his resolve to combat the horrors of racial violence. Through his meticulous documentation, White investigated in Tennessee marked the beginning of his perilous yet pivotal journey for White and the NAACP. His mission was not just dangerous, it was life-threatening. But he used his fair complexion as his sword and shield as he assumed the identities of either a white salesman or a journalist to infiltrate these violent enclaves. Each investigation was like walking on a tightrope. Misjudged word or crack in the disguise could mean death. One of his earliest assignments involved probing the hanging of 10 men and the horrifying lynching of a pregnant woman. In the chilling encounter, White faked friendship with a local merchant that he had suspected was involved in the killings. Remarkably, the merchant mistaked White for a kindred spirit and began boasting about the lynchings, offering up a first-hand account of these atrocities. By October of 1919, during the height of the Red Summer, the searing heat of racial tensions boiled over in Elaine, Arkansas, where the lethal combination of a labor conflict and racial hatred erupted. White vigilantes and federal troops massacred between 100 and 237 black sharecroppers during a meeting about unionizing efforts. White was among the few who dared to uncover the grisly truths, meticulously documenting his findings. Prominent publications like Daily News, the Chicago Defender, The Nation, and the NAACP's own magazine, The Crisis. His revelations were so explosive that Arkansas's governor sought to ban the distribution of these publications, which was a testament to the power of White's investigative prowess. Amidst another lynching in Phillips County, Arkansas, while staying at a local motel, he noticed the sharp, suspicious eyes of some of the townfolks lingering on him longer than usual. The town had obtained a tip about a troublesome white man who was actually black working for the NAACP. While gathering information, posing as a traveling salesman, his covert investigation almost came to a sudden end when law enforcement attempted to confront him. According to White's own accounts, he narrowly escaped after being warned by a black employee at the hotel where he was staying. The employee overheard officials discussing their suspicions of White and their plans to arrest him. That night, White fled the town under the cover of darkness, boarding the next train out of town. His colleagues in New York trembled with fear and relief in equal measure when Walt walked into the door of the NAACP's offices, and very much alive. Over the next decade, White's primary role was as an undercover investigator, a master of disguise who delved into the heart of racial violence. His complexion and quick wits enabled him to coax confessions and anecdotes from those complicit in the lynchings and the riots, accounts that were later to reverberate through the NAACP's publications. His investigation spanned 41 lynchings and 8 race riots, each fraught with peril and narrow escapes. from vigilante justice. In January of 1929, the world came face to face with this audacious truth bearer. White published a searing expose in the American Mercury entitled "I Investigate Lynchings." Later that year, in his book, The Rope and delivered an authoritative but chilling analysis of lynching's insidious causes. White wasn't just documenting history, he was shaping the narrative of justice and equality in America. White was also a relentless advocate for federal anti-lynching bill legislation. During his tenure with the NAACP, White surveys unveiled horrifying statistics such as 46 of 50 lynchings in the first half of 1919 were against Black victims. Partnering with Ida B. Wells, White unmasked the root of most racial violence, the baseless accusations that Black men were assaulting white women. But the truth was almost always deep-seated racial prejudice and economic rivalry. Amidst this turmoil, efforts led to the Dwyer Anti-Lynching Bill in 1922. The bill would pass the House only to be thwarted by the iron grip of Southern Democrats. Despite numerous attempts in the 1930s and 1940s, legislative endeavors suffered similar disappointments. Despite these setbacks, White's attempts raised the public consciousness, and his fight, while incomplete during his own era, catalyzed future civil rights victories. History finally vindicated White's struggle in 2020 with the passage of the Emmett Till Anti-Lynching Bill. In March of 1931, as James Woodin Johnson stepped down as NAACP's executive secretary, Walter White ascended into leadership. His meteoric rise shifted from his focus from fervent activism of the Roaring Twenties to meticulous, pragmatic organization that would define the rest of his career. At the helm of the nation's foremost civil rights organization, White's ambition was unyielding, dismantling systematic racism brick by oppressive brick. Under White's astute leadership, the NAACP launched an ambitious crusade and it championed interracial unionization. It shattered barriers of wartime defense jobs for Black Americans and pressured the Pentagon to desegregate the military. The association waged a relentless assault on Jim Crow laws and set the stage for dismantling segregation itself. White, dubbed Mr. NAACP, advocacy made him a staple at the Oval Office. 1955, White drew his last breath at the age of 61. His legacy sat at a crossroads of admiration and controversy. He had achieved monumental strides in racial justice, yet his ability to maneuver within and sometimes exploit racial lines left a bitter taste in the mouth of some African Americans. Soon after White died, a new generation of African American leaders emerged, and for those leaders, his pale complexion was an inconvenience. Still, the echoes of White's tireless endeavors resounded through the multitude of tributes which he received. As the paper, the Amsterdam News, poignantly noted that White's cocky aggressiveness stayed with him for as long as he lived, as did his boyhood vanity. But these are the qualities that made him the best lobbyist our race has ever produced, and one of the very best of any race. Thank you. This has been the story of Walter White. If you like more stories like this, you can find ones like this at onemikehistory.com. Also, like to thank all my supporters, Patreon subscribers, and my YouTube members. Without you, none of this could be possible. Thank you for your support, and peace.